own and inhabit about 1/15th part of the dry land of the whole earth. We run our memory back over the pages of history for about 82 years, and we discover that we were then a very small people in point of numbers, vastly inferior to what we are now, with a vastly less extended country, with vastly less of everything we deem desirable among men. We hold these annual celebrations to remind ourselves of all the good that was done in the process of time, of how it was done, and who did it, and how we are historically connected with it. And we go from these meetings in better humor with ourselves. We feel more attached to one to the other, and more firmly bound to the country we inhabit.
I have no love for America as such. I have no patriotism. I have no country. Tell me, what country have I? The institutions of this country do not know me, do not recognize me as a man. The only thing that links me to this land is my family, and the painful consciousness that here there are 3 millions of my fellow creatures groaning beneath the iron rod of the worst despotism that could be devised.
Mr. President, how then do you reconcile the division slavery is causing in our nation? The war you have so earnestly struggled to avoid will divide us even more.
I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I expressed this belief a year ago, and subsequent developments have but confirmed me. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the House to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing, or all the other. Welcome or unwelcome, agreeable or disagreeable, whether this shall be an entire slave nation is the issue before us. Every incident, every
Yes, liberty and slavery cannot dwell together forever in the same country. There is not an iota of affinity existing between them. They hate each other with a hatred which is unto death. They ever have been, and they ever must remain, in a state of irreconcilable hostility.
Did you ever, 5 years ago, hear of anybody in the world saying that the Negro had no share in the Declaration of National Independence? That it did not mean Negroes at all? And when all men were spoken of, Negroes were not included?
I am called by way of reproach a runaway slave, as if it were a crime, an unpardonable crime, for a man to take his inalienable rights.
When we established this government, we had slaves among us. We could not get our Constitution unless we permitted them to remain in slavery. We could not secure the good we did secure if we grasped for more. And having by necessity submitted to that much, it does not destroy the principle that is the charter of our liberties. Let the charter remain as our standards.
Well, Mr. Douglas, on the topic of the Constitution, you are well known for having pointed out what you believe to be inconsistencies in Mr. Lincoln's approach to the issue of our founding documents. But you do not only have some changes of opinion, perhaps.
If I am right now, it really does not matter what I was 14 years ago. My position now is one of reform, not of revolution. I would act for the abolition of slavery through the government, not over its ruins.
Then you would temper your sentiment from revolution to legislation.
George Washington can never be claimed as a fanatic, or as a representative of fanatics. The slaveholders impudently use his name for the base purpose of giving respectability to slavery. Yet in a letter to Robert Morris, Washington uses this language which at this day would make him a terror of the slaveholders and the natural representative of the Republican Party. I quote, "There is not a man living who wishes more sincerely than I do to see some plan adopted for the abolition of slavery. But there is only one proper and effectual mode by which it can be accomplished, and that is by legislative authority. And this, as far as my suffrage will go, shall not be wanting." the slave, who was not himself a party to the compact or agreement.
And you yourself have also described the Constitution as a most
foul and bloody conspiracy against the rights of 3 millions of enslaved and imbruded men.
Precisely, and yet in January of 1849, when asked to debate the very issue of whether the Constitution is or is not a slavery document, you declined to debate, and in fact conceded.
On a close examination of the Constitution, I am satisfied that if strictly construed according to its reading, it is not a pro-slavery instrument.
So, Mr. Lincoln, is then this a point of agreement between the two of you?
Again, the institution of slavery is only mentioned in the Constitution of the United States 2 or 3 times. And in neither of these cases does the word slavery or Negro race occur, but covert language is used each time. It runs in about this way: the migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808.
Mr. Douglas, President Lincoln seems to suggest a different interpretation than your own, based on covert language.
The Constitution may be right. The government may be wrong. If the government has been governed by mean, sordid, and wicked passions, it does not follow that the Constitution is mean, sordid, and wicked.
But if the Constitution is for, quote, we the people, and enough people come into a different conclusion about people of your race, please explain then how you come to your own conclusion.
The Constitution of the United States declares, quote, that the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all the privileges and immunities of citizens in the United States. There is in this clause of the Constitution nothing whatever of what that watchful malignity that has manifested itself lately in the insertion of the word white before the term citizen. The word white was unknown to the framers of the Constitution of the United States in such connection. Unknown to the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Unknown to the brave man at Bunker Hill, Ticonderoga, and at Red Bank. It is a modern word, brought into use by modern legislators, despised in revolutionary times.
So, Mr. Lincoln, your response.
On the question of liberty as a principle, we are not what we have been. When we were the political slaves of King George and wanted to be free, we called the maxim that all men are created equal a self-evident truth. But now, when we have grown fat and have lost all dread of being slaves ourselves, we have become so greedy to be masters that we call the same maxim a self-evident lie. Our political problem now is, can we, as a nation, continue together permanently, forever, half slave and half free?
Now the question is, does the Constitution in any of its provisions know any man as a slave? Does it know anything under the name and character of slavery? As the President just said, is there a single word in the Constitution about slaves, slaveholders, or slavery? We utterly deny that there is one such word, one such sentence, or one such syllable to be found in the instrument.
But, Mr. Douglas, since the Constitution was signed, the economic sentiments of those holding slaves have changed to the point they believe they need slavery to exist and continue. They therefore do not consider slaves to be citizens.
We the people, not we the white people, not we the citizens or the legal voters, not we the privileged class and excluding all other classes, but we the people. Not we the horses and cattle, but we the people, the men and women, the human inhabitants of the United States do ordain and establish the Constitution, etc. I ask then any man to read the Constitution and tell me where, if he can, in what particular that instrument affords the slightest sanction of slavery.
But, gentlemen, as you both know, the Dred Scott decision decided by the Supreme Court back on March the 6th
I believe the Supreme Court and the advocates of that decision may search in vain for the place in the Constitution where the rights of property in a slave is distinctly and expressly affirmed.
And there you have it. It cannot be shown that slavery is established by law, even in the slave-holding states.
Let us understand this. I am not just here trying to prove that we are right and they are wrong. President Jackson once said each man was bound to support the Constitution as he understood it. I understand it another way, and therefore I am bound to support it in the way in which I understand it.
So, Mr. President, do you propose to ignore the Supreme Court's ruling?
We believe in obedience and respect for the judicial department of the government, but we think the Dred Scott decision is erroneous.
Slavery will be attacked in its stronghold. The compromises of the Constitution and the cry of disunion shall be more fearlessly proclaimed till slavery be abolished. The Union dissolved, or the son of this guilty nation must go down in blood.
Then, Mr. Lincoln, do you support Mr. Douglas's position of bloodshed if all else fails?
Let every American, every lover of liberty, every well-wisher to his posterity swear by the blood of the Revolution never to violate in the least particular the laws of the country, and never to tolerate their violation by others.
Mr. Douglas, your response.
I claim to be an American citizen. The Constitution knows but two classes. Firstly, citizens, and secondly, aliens. I am not an alien, and I am therefore a citizen. I am, moreover, a free citizen. Free, thank God, not only by the law of the state in which I was born and brought up, but free by the laws of nature.
But Mr. Douglas, Mr. Lincoln is to firmly strengthen the rule of law.
The intention of the lawgiver is the law, says Mr. Lincoln. But we say that this depends upon whether the intention itself is lawful.
Well then, Mr. President, going further, you now propose the Southern states have no right to secede from the Union. But you did not once say, and I quote from your address to the U.S. House of Representatives back on January the 12th, 1848, when you were a member of that body, any people anywhere being inclined and having the power have the right to rise up and shake off the existing government and form a new one that suits them better. Have not the Southern states merely exercised that sacred right?
I hold the Constitution, the union of these states is perpetual. Perpetuity is implied, if not expressed, in the fundamental law of all national governments. The Union is much older than the Constitution. It was formed, in fact, by the Articles of Association in 1774. It was matured and continued by the Declaration of Independence in 1776. It was further matured, and the faith of all the then 13 states expressly plighted and engaged that it should be perpetual by the Articles of Confederation in 1778. And finally, in 1787, one of the declared objects for ordaining and establishing the Constitution was to form a more perfect union.
So, Mr. Douglas, Mr. Lincoln contends the Union is perpetual.
Mr. Lincoln proceeds to give a very lucid exposition of the nature of the Federal Union. His argument is excellent, but the difficulty is that the argument comes too late. When men deliberately arm themselves with the avowed intention of breaking up the government, when they openly insult its flag, capture its forts, seize its munitions of war, and organize a hostile government, it would seem of little use to argue with them.
Still, Mr. Douglas, how can you deny the tendency of the Constitution is toward condoning slavery?
I admit it. They have given the Constitution a slave-holding interpretation. I admit it, yes. They have committed innumerable wrongs against the Negro in the name of the Constitution. Yes, I admit it all, but it does not follow that the Constitution is in favor of these wrongs because the slaveholders have given it that interpretation.
But let me press you just a bit further, Mr. Douglas. Surely you can't defend the 3 Fifths Clause, counting your brethren in the South as only
What does it amount to? I answer, it is a downright disability laid upon the slave-holding states, one which deprives those states of 2/5 of their natural basis of representation. Therefore, instead of encouraging slavery, the Constitution encourages freedom by giving an increase of 2/5 of political power to free over slave states. So much for the 3/5 clause. Taking it at its worst, it still leads to freedom, not to slavery. For be it remembered that the Constitution nowhere forbids a colored man to vote. Besides, it has been shown that in 11 out of the old 13 states, colored men were legal voters at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. In conclusion, let me say, all I ask of the American people is they live up to the Constitution, adopt its principles, imbibe its spirit, and enforce its provisions.
When I so pressingly urge the strict observance of all the laws, let me not be understood as saying there are no bad laws. I mean to say no such thing. But I do mean to say that although bad laws exist, they should be repealed as soon as possible. Still, while they continue in force, for the sake of example, they should be religiously observed.
And Mr. Douglas, if Mr. Lincoln is for steadfast obedience to the law until the next law can be changed, are you satisfied with that? Or would you dissolve the Union from those who give to the Constitution a slavery interpretation?
My point here is, first, the Constitution is according to its reading an anti-slavery document. And secondly, to dissolve the Union as a means to abolish slavery is about as wise as it would be to burn up this city in order to get the thieves out of it.
So, Mr. President, pursuing a slightly different argument, what is your response to those white men who consider slavery morally right for a race they presume to be inferior?
I am in favor of giving an opportunity to such white men to try it on for themselves.
Mr. Lincoln, you've often been accused of dragging your feet when it comes to abolishing slavery. Can we then, once and for all, get a position from you on a more perfect union, cited in the Constitution, with or without slavery?
I would save the Union. I would save it the shortest way under the Constitution. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or to destroy slavery.
Mr. Douglas, your response.
I come now to the policy of President Lincoln in reference to slavery. An administration without a policy is confessedly an administration without brains. I do not take to undertake to say that the present administration has no policy, but if it has, the people have the right to know what it is, and to approve or disapprove of it as they shall deem it worthy, wise or unwise.
I do not wish to be understood upon this subject of slavery in this country. I suppose it may long exist. Perhaps the best way for it to come to an end peaceably is for it to exist for a length of time. But I say that the spread and strengthening and perpetuation of it is an entirely different proposition. There we should in every way resist it as a wrong, treating it as a wrong, with a fixed idea that it must and will come to an end.
Illogical and unfair as Mr. Lincoln's statements are, they are nevertheless quite in keeping with his whole course from the beginning of his administration up to this day. Notwithstanding his repeated declarations that he considers slavery an evil, every step on his presidential career related to slavery proves him an active, decided, and brave for its support, and passive, cowardly, and treacherous to the very cause of liberty to which he owes his election.
Mr. President, Mr. Douglas is rather adamant in his negative appraisal of your record and your words. He's basically accusing you of being two-faced on the subject of slaves.
If I were two-faced, do you suppose I'd wear this one?
Let me reword the question, if I may. Many have challenged your position that ending the war was more important to you than ending slavery.
Before proceeding, let me say I think I have no prejudice against the Southern people. They are just what we would be in their situation. If slavery did not now exist amongst them, they would not introduce it. If it did now exist amongst us, we should not instantly give it up. This I believe of the masses north and south. When it is said that the institution exists, and that it is difficult to get rid of it in any satisfactory way, I can understand and appreciate the saying. I surely will not blame them for not doing what I should not know how to do myself.
Whether on the coast of Africa, among the savage tribes, or in South Carolina, among the refined and civilized, slavery is the same. It makes no difference whether the slaveholder worships God or the Christians, or is a follower of Muhammad. He is the minister of the same cruelty, and the author of the same misery. Slavery is always slavery. Always the same foul, haggard, and damned scourge, whether found in the eastern or western hemisphere.
Mr. President, how then is saving the Union possible when you admit you can't solve the problem of slavery? Do you truly believe there is no hope?
We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. The way is plain, peaceful, generous, just. A way which, if followed, the world will forever applaud, and God must forever bless.
Among the first questions that tried the strength of my childhood mind was first, why are colored people slaves? And the next was, will their slavery last forever? From that day onward, the cry that has reached the most silent chambers of my soul by day and by night has been, how long? How long? Oh, eternal power of the universe, how long shall these things be?
Mr. Douglas, on constitutional grounds, the president is limited to the will of the people.
We boast of our self-government. What superlative nonsense. It has no existence except one day out of the 4 years. By the Constitution of the United States, our king reigns over us for 4 years. And being simply installed in the presidential chair, with a cabinet of his own selection, the president is thereafter beyond the reach of the people. You cannot get at him. He's above inquiry. And there are above impeachment and below assassination.
Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. The fiery trial from which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom for the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve.
Well, that brings us inevitably to the question of war, Mr. Lincoln, trying so earnestly to avoid war with the Southern states. But when the news came that Fort Sumter had surrendered, Mr. Douglas, you shouted, God be praised. You have stated that dawn would be the months of appeasement.
Months of appeasement. To purchase peace and prosperity for the North by granting the most demoralizing concessions to the slave power. As a friend of freedom, earnestly laboring for the abolition of slavery, we have no tears to shed, no lamentations to make over the fall of Fort Sumter.
Mr. President, your response.
The last brave hope for preserving the Union peaceably expired at the assault upon Fort Sumter, and the war came. And if God wills that it continue, till all wealth piled up by 250 years of the bondsman's unrequited toil be sunk, every drop of blood